are the absolute GOAT. There are so many things, so many accomplishments that we can talk about. You've built your own agency that was acquired. You wrote a book. That's something that's always been on my bucket list, but I don't think I will ever achieve that. You've launched a podcast. You're a well-known thought leader in our industry and speaker. And I'm sure I'm leaving so many other things out, but so honored to have you speak today to our community and hear more about your journey. So let's just get into it. And let's start with kind of the beginning of your journey, Bobsled, that you created. What made you want to start? And tell us about the name too.
I started Bobsled back in 2015, which was originally an Amazon-focused marketing agency. But absolutely no right to do so. I had never worked in e-commerce at a brand. I'd never even worked like a day in an agency ever. So I came in as a complete outsider with no business starting an Amazon agency. What drove me to that was I had a small e-commerce brand that I'd been tinkering on for a couple of years at that point, working nights and weekends. I was originally in banking, so it was sort of like a creative outlet for me. And Amazon just started to become a bigger part of this little brand that I was working on. And I realized like I kind of know more about Amazon than some of my clients at the bank who are running much larger businesses than I was. So I was looking to sort of move out of that career in banking, and I decided to like hang up my shingle as a consultant in 2015. And that's how it all started.
That's really interesting because nobody else has that same story. Everybody else was like either worked at Amazon or they, were at a brand, but you actually were in banking, which is very unique. What you've accomplished is so that's pretty amazing. As you reflect on building the agency business, what was the hardest thing about it?
Yeah, well, to your point about a lot of other people that get into this space come with some level of contacts or, like yourself from Amazon, you have like a little bit of something to get started with. But for me, as a complete outsider, it was all about client acquisition and sort of proving that someone should really take a chance on me and my company initially. So it was what I really leaned into, since I didn't have this Rolodex and I didn't have a lot of credibility, was creating lots of educational content. So I just sat down and I just blogged. I wrote articles, I filmed videos, I created like a little course. I just did all of this content as a way to prove that I knew what I was talking about. And ultimately that sort of ended up paying off over time. But that was certainly the most challenging thing about building the business.
During that time, a lot of people started building. You were early in the agency business, but today it's a lot more mature. And there's a lot. I think someone told me there was something like 3,000 Amazon agencies. And maybe when we all started in 2015, there was, I don't even know how many, but way not that many. What would you say, like, as it becomes more competitive, did that content marketing help you stand out? And do you think that still works today? Like, do you think that's still the formula of today?
I had this experience that made sense at the time. And like you said, it was much more of a blue ocean at that point in time. I don't think I could do today what I was able to do back then as a complete outsider. It would be very, very difficult. As to what is the correct way to do it, I'm still a huge fan of building a personal brand and a content brand because it creates a lot of goodwill towards your solution. And these clients who would come in through inbound were the best. They already trusted us. They already knew what we were all about. We didn't need to convince them of anything once they actually came through and started speaking with us in the sales process. They already felt like they knew us. And I would hear a comment from people frequently, which was, "Oh, I've been reading your newsletter for 2 years and like now it's finally time for me to make a decision around an agency." So there was always so much trust there. I still believe in content marketing and building a personal brand. However, you're correct that it's a completely different landscape today than it was back then.
Yeah, the stakes are higher and there's a lot more noise to cut through, but it seems like content marketing is still kind of always works?
Very early on, it must have been only 2016, I heard from one of the holding company agencies, like there was an interview that I listened to with someone from one of the holdco in a very senior leadership position, and they flat out said, we're not going to have anything to do with Amazon. It's not an opportunity that we're pursuing, and I really don't see it ever happening. And that's what was happening back then. It was so nascent. It was not a priority for the big agencies. But I was very confident that this was something that brands large and small needed to take ownership of their brand on Amazon and be driving the bus. And so I think if, maybe my exact format of content wouldn't work today, but I would encourage people to try and think about what is an unpopular viewpoint that you have? What do you really have conviction that maybe your larger competitors don't have or the industry doesn't have yet? So maybe it's not Amazon is the next big thing or retail media is the next big thing. That's obvious. Everyone is chasing that opportunity. But what is something that you believe is going to be a big part of our future that is still nascent? And that's where you can actually really develop a point of view and go after it rather than chasing the big thing that everyone already knows is a big thing.
All right. If someone does that, let us know. Tell us what it is. Or maybe don't tell us in a couple of years when you get acquired. Let's talk a little bit about scaling the business. And I think, at PackView, we had been calling on you and trying to get you to use PackView, and you finally did at some point. When did you decide?
2020.
2020. Well, that was the retail media boom when everyone else was going into retail media platforms. So is that something that helped you scale? What made you finally decide to say yes to do technology?
Yeah, well, back in the early days, the technology was very nascent and there wasn't a whole lot of options to choose from. And over time, just as the space became more attractive, there were better and better options out there. And so when we onboarded with PackView in 2020, we were in need of something a lot more sophisticated to match the sophistication of our clients and what they were looking for, and multi-channel capability as well, going beyond, just Amazon ads, for example. We started to do a lot more with Walmart and Instacart and other retail media platforms as well. So there was a step change in sophistication and requirements from our clients at that point.
Also competitive landscape with all the tool providers rushing into the gold rush of the SaaS tool space.
Yeah.
During 2020 as well. Let's fast forward a little bit and talk about your acquisition. So you started Bobsled in 2015. You were acquired in 2022 by Acadia. What made you decide to do that? And anything about the process? Did you get an advisor, legal? How did that work?
Yeah, so Bobsled was fortunate to have an amazing team, and Julie Spear, who's still at Acadia leading the retail marketplaces and media division. She was my right-hand person at Bobsled, really managing the day-to-day of the business. I was very fortunate to be in a position where I was more of the strategic view of the industry. And I sort of had, it was a very personal decision for me, really, that I would, in order to keep growing the company and get to the next level and make it an exciting environment for all of the team members and continue to sort of be a leader in the space, I would need to be a different leader, and I would need to sort of grow up a little bit in a way. I mean, you go through this evolution as an entrepreneur, and when you start out, it's you're doing every single job. You're the butcher, baker, candlestick maker. And I remember when I first started Bobsled, I was living in New York and I didn't leave my apartment for 3 days. I went to the grocery store one day. I'm like, I think this is the first time I've got out of the house in 3 days. And there is looking back, you can romanticize that a little bit. And it was really exciting. And, that excitement and that thrill and the need to solve problems that are new, that starts to go away as the business matures and it becomes a little bit more about more predictable things. And I knew that I would struggle to sort of go to the next level on a personal level. So that's, ultimately when I started to think about an acquisition was I knew that the business would be stronger under a new leader. And I was ready to sort of pass the baton on in a lot of ways.
And what about the process? That's always a fun one in terms of bankers, lawyers. Like, what was the team that you needed to be able to do a deal?
Yeah, I hired a M&A advisor, which was one of the best decisions that I made. They really were instrumental in getting the deal done. There's a huge sort of psychological aspect to selling a business, and as well as the mechanics of it as well. And these guys, R&D advisors is the name, that they've been doing deals their whole career, right? They were on the agency side making acquisitions, and then sort of switched over to the sell side and do a little bit of both. So they do this multiple times every year for decades. This is the first and maybe only time I will sell a company. So I don't know what I'm doing. I listened to all the podcasts and read all the books. It's a very different experience when you're actually going through it. And you need someone who you really trust and connect with on a personal level that can like talk you off the ledge when things get really tough, which they always do. And then also like just on the logistics level, like, what does this mean? What are my options? What should I do next? I'm really struggling with this. And because this is their job and what they've done for a long time, they just have a perspective that you will never, ever have. And also like, this is your baby. You're going to have some kind of emotional attachment to your business at the end of the day. And it's difficult to detach from that during the process and not be offended about things that people will call your baby ugly, maybe,
Yeah.
or like, questions that kind of seem a little personal or offensive. And they're like, no, it's just, this is just something that people are going to ask or wonder about. So absolutely would recommend finding an advisor that you really drive with personally, that has a lot of experience in your category, and it's worth whatever you end up paying them.
Were there any surprises or learnings during the process that you said something like about your personal brand being both one of the pluses and maybe a hindrance? Like, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So this was, and look, I wouldn't do it any differently today, but Bobsled was really kind of tied to my personal brand. Like I said, in order to sort of stand out and get some visibility for the company, I really went on this big content offensive, and I was blogging, and I started writing for Forbes in 2017, and I was podcasting, and I was, doing speaking at events and all this kind of stuff. And that really helped the company to grow. And then when you get to a point where you're discussing an acquisition, it's like, well, how do we, from the acquirer's perspective, they're like, well, if you get hit by a bus or if you leave the company, like what happens to all these inbound leads? So it's a totally fair question. And to be honest, like that was a question even when I was running the company. Like if I get hit by a bus, what happens? Like this sort of is quite dependent on me. And what I had been quite conscious of was bringing as many team members into that process as possible and collaborating with team members on content. So for example, one of the books that I published, Instacart for CMOs, that was co-written with our head of advertising at the time at Bobsled. So, I'm not the only thought leader on Instacart. Now, I have Stefan who, I wrote this book with, and I'm trying to sort of share that experience and that sort of halo effect with other people in the company. and make that a deliberate part of everyone else's job as well. So everyone's sort of contributing to the blog. They're coming on the podcast. They are like collaborating on thought leadership content with me. So that's really ultimately at the end of the day, there's always going to be a drawback with any form of marketing that you do. If you're reliant on paid ads, what if ad costs go up? If you're reliant on SEO, what happens when Google changes the algorithm? Like there's always a failure point in any marketing approach. And with thought leadership, it's the fact that you're going to rely on a thought leader. People don't trust companies the same way that they trust people. So ultimately, that was something I had to get across to potential acquirers was like, look, I've built a personal brand, but I've also been, it's also been a very deliberate part of the process for several years at this point to bring other people along on the journey and like elevate other people's profiles as well, and make this part of the DNA of the brand. But ultimately, yeah, you never get around the fact that there is a failure point in that, just like any other channel.
I think it's really great advice, though, because there's so many, me included, of being founders. So you're out there, you're on stage, and making a concerted effort to, and that's definitely something that I'm working on this year, is elevating other people in the company, getting more thought leadership out there from others. Because you may be you, but we're actually surrounded by team members helping us, and it's the team. It's always the team that's always contributing, at least in my case, to thought leadership. And so really being able to elevate others on the team, I think that's a really important point, especially in our space, because that's so prevalent. Now that you've left Acadia, you've been acquired, what is next for you? And will you be coming back to the US and we'll see you in real life soon?
I'm in Australia right now. We're getting our green cards in 2025. So I'll be back in the States once all that goes through. Yeah, it's interesting. When I left Acadia, I was really keen to take some time off, and I wasn't sure if I really wanted to stay in the industry. I've been doing this for 9 years. Like I was kind of sick of talking about ACOS and Prime Day. I thought maybe I would just, I needed some time away to figure out like, what do I want to do next? And ultimately I realized after a few months of traveling and spending time with my family and just like dabbling with, a few different projects and all of that I do really love this space. And what I love about it is the people. And people in this industry, you've got to be drawn to problem solving if you're going to be in e-commerce and retail media, because we're all just figuring this out as we go along, right? So I find it such a dynamic space with people who are very passionate and engaged, and I don't think that you can find that in every industry. So I recognize like I was, onto a pretty good thing in this space, and so I'm going to be coming back in 2025 with a new project for in the retail media ecosystem.
Well, we don't have to talk about Prime Day and ROAS. We can talk about iROAS, incrementality ROAS, and AI. So there's always something new we can talk about. And passion, I love that you say that, because that's something I always interview for. Like when someone is passionate, like that's one of my big qualities that I look for in employees, is just, are they passionate about the space? Just to me, it feels like that's something that helps you be successful. We can't wait until 2025. We've got to wait another month to see you in real life sometime. But what's the best way to contact you?
I'm one of those cringy LinkedIn people, I guess. Like I love LinkedIn. I'm all about it. So if you reach out to me there, I'll definitely that's where I'm most active.
All right. Well, thank you, Kiri, so much. And we will see you around in the industry.